Hello, everyone. Welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himbar. But today I have a more academic video, as I have had several of these over the years. And this one is going to be looking at a bit of medieval history, medieval text, if you will. It is literally a history book, actually. Um, and it is Íslendingabók by Ari Þorgilsson. I actually gave this originally as a presentation for a class. I am presently working on getting I'm a couple years actually into getting my master's degree. It's a Master's of Arts in Language and Literature. My focus or major essentially is Germanic philology. So um, this is one that I gave in the class I'm currently in, actually right now. When this video comes out, I'll probably only have a couple days left in the class. So pretty much done with it at this point. But I gave this presentation a couple weeks ago. I have also since built on it for an essay for class. I will probably actually present that essay in like a lecture format, sort of like I did with the chauvinistic love of words. Also in an upcoming video, where I also talk about Íslendingabók, but also more broadly speaking, and I'm kind of comparing it to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in that article. But for here, we mostly are just going to look at briefly what Íslendingabók is, for anyone interested in it in Icelandic texts. I mean, this is not a saga. It's not an Edda, right? So there's nothing really mythic about this. This is really the first history of Iceland, written by an Icelander, and it's about Iceland, and particularly where does literacy come from in Northern Europe? Well, it comes from conversion, it comes from Christianity, right? And so it's focused on that conversion. So let's get into it. So this is the first Old Norse history. It was early in the 12th century, around 1120 or so, maybe over into the early 1130s. Ari wrote the first chronicle in Old Norse, the Íslendingabók, is preceded by the written history of the Norwegian kings by Icelander Sæmundur Sigfússon, which was likely written in Latin, though we do not have that text anymore. Um, and one of the reasons we actually know supposedly, right, that Ari wrote the first history in Old Norse is because Snorri Sturluson actually said so at one point, and he recognized that Sæmundur the Wise is, of course, a historian before this time. And we do have histories. A lot of these sagas are really histories in a sense. They're about famous people or about kings or whatnot. Just like in England, you have a tendency to write similar stories, sagas of a sort, but they're Vedas, right? And they're normally about saints, and whether they're Anglo-Saxon saints or saints from some other time and place. So what we do have here, though, again, is this first thing. The history survives itself in two paper manuscripts from the 17th century. This is a page, a folium taken from one. Um, they look like paper. They don't look like the nice medieval manuscripts. These are probably copied from something really close to the composition by Ari, but anything from the actual medieval period for this text does not survive, as far as we're aware, essentially. So, essentially, though, the whole Íslendingabók is a concise recounting of the history of Iceland up into the point that Ari is writing, essentially. A little bit before, it ends a little bit before his time, and he establishes his sources as reliable throughout. It's a lot of it is based off of, well, I heard it from this guy, and this guy is reliable, right? Because people say so, and I say so. Um, I think he does a good job on relying on his sources. Actually, he only mentions one other source in his whole text, actually, and that is one that actually doesn't come up in this presentation. So I'll just mention it here real quick. And that is a saga of Saint Edmund the Martyr, one of the older patron saints of England, who this saga, I'm not even sure if we have evidence much of it. I haven't read a saga of Saint Edmund, at least. But he also is obviously taken from some other sources, but this is the one he mentions, the only one he mentions, actually. He makes a point to emphasize the actual people he's talked to, but not the books he's read. Besides that saga, that's literally the only thing he mentions. Though you can even tell there are two appendices. There are some appendices attached to this, and one of them is a genealogy. And these bear a strong resemblance to the Anglian pedigrees. So he's obviously taking from some other things as well. In fact, there's a good article on this, and I referenced it actually in my essays, so maybe this is a little off topic, but it's The Sources, Dating, and Composition of Íslendingabók by Ben Alport, if you want to look that up and get more on his sources. But either ways, let's get on to this. So the table of contents, there's 10 chapters. There's on settlement of Iceland, on the settlers and establishment of laws, the laws coming from Norway, right? The settlement of Iceland is where actually the mentioning of this saga of Edmund is mentioned. And as it is, Edmund died in 870, and that is also the year supposedly that Harold Finehair had Iceland settled, right? So we also have the establishment of Althane, this essentially this early, well, more like high medieval commonwealth that survived until the middle of the 13th century. And then on the calendar, on the division into quarters, which is just talking about the more local thing, divisions, on the settlement of Greenland, which again would be going more into depths if you want to read like the saga of the Greenlanders and stuff. But like the Vinland saga, for example. So, anyways, and so on how Christianity came to Iceland, and then on foreign bishops, on Bishop Isleifur and on Bishop Gizur. So we're going to focus on those last three. A lot of these chapters are really short, by the way. If you go and read Íslendingabók yourself, you could read it very easily in one sitting. It's really not long at all. So let's get into chapter 8. So chapter 8, and here's a quote, because this is going to set us up for what I wanted to research, which is actually the bishops themselves mentioned here. So these are the names of the foreign bishops who have been in Iceland according to Teitur's account. Friðrekr came here during the heathen period, and these were later Bjarnharður, the book learned, for 5 years, Koller for a few years, Hrothorfr for 19 years, Johann the Irishman for a few years, Bjarnharður for 19 years, Heinrekr for 2 years. In addition, 5 others came here who called themselves bishops, Ornolfr and Gotiskarkr, and 3 from Ermlon, Peter, Abraham, and Stephen. And so we're actually going to have a slide for each one of these, whether if they're grouped together, then there will be one slide for them. But I think the only ones I was not able to find any information on actually was Ornolfr and Gotiskarkr here, unfortunately. Right, so we have Friðrekr going in order. So this is likely a person named Friedrich, a missionary bishop, generally thought to be a German, a Saxon specifically, also mentioned in Kristni saga. A Saxon would make sense. At this time, the North, whether it's like the Saxons in particular, in Scandinavia, Denmark, Iceland, England, they're all relatively connected, or at least at the time of conversion, which would have been in the year 999 or year 1000, as what Ari says. But the dating that he was using is probably not quite what we would say today. And so, according to our modern reckoning, it probably would have been year 999. And they're rather connected. England loses a lot of that connection after the Norman conquest. But he's also mentioned this. Friðrekr is also mentioned in Kristni saga, Goretis saga, and Vatnsdal saga. He came to Iceland in 981, so several years before, well, considerably a generation before conversion. And he arrived with Thorvald Kodransson, who he apparently baptized. While Thorvald's family was baptized, they faced ridicule, including taunting from skaldic verses, which is pretty tough to bear, apparently, because Thorvald killed 2 because of this taunting, and with the contention not stopping, Friðrekr left Iceland in 986. So he's there for 5 years, and really, that is quite a hefty mission, I would say, still. We have Bjarnharður, the book learned, who is English. He is part of St. Olaf's entourage, sent to Iceland, St. Olaf being the saint, essentially, of Norway, in a sense. And then later the Canute the Great made him bishop of Scania, which is, at the time, was part of Denmark, actually. And that's essentially, I believe, as far as like ancient lore is concerned, is where the Danes originate, is in Scania. And maybe those islands over, like where Leira is in the current capital, Copenhagen. But that is now part of modern Sweden. And so Scania is now Sweden. But at the time it was Danish. It was been Danish for a long time. Before the Angles and Saxons moved over there, they would have been neighbors of the Angles right there in the Angeln, also on Jutland. So, and most of Jutland actually would have not, at least way back then, would not have been Danish. It would have been Jutes and Angles in the southern portion, Saxons and some Frisians probably over on the western side too. And so But it's been Danish for a really long time at this point. That's pretty much prehistory, really, essentially. So that's an aside as well for me. All right, that's pretty much all the information I have on Bjarnharður. Then we have Koller, who is likely also sent by Saint Olaf. He is first bishop buried at Skullholt, which is going to come up later. I believe it's Skullholt in modern Icelandic. I could be wrong. It could be the other way, actually. It could be Skullholt in modern Icelandic and Skullholt in Old Norse. All right, so then we have Hrothulfur. I don't think I missed anything. Yeah, so another of Olaf's English bishops. He had quite the relation with English bishops, which of course also makes sense when you have the Danish conquest and stuff going on. A lot of influence in the north going on here. So this and the text that I read actually may be related to the Norman Archbishop Robert, who baptized Olaf in Hua in 1015. He was a kinsman of Edward the Confessor, whose mother Emma was Robert's sister, Emma of Normandy, that is. All right, and who actually comes up in a Swithin video I did on my other channel recently. But presumably he was sent by Archbishop Laurentius around 1030. He returned to England in 1050 and became the abbot of Abingdon before passing in 1052. Here is one of the many paintings that was done for Rouen Cathedral by Monet. And let's actually we're going to get another portion of Thulfulfur. So this is actually in 1050 in the C text of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. You have Anjav Hrothulfur, so not quite the same English version. Bishopa Hismaya at Abudricha on Abandona. So he gave Bishop Rodolph, his kinsman, the abbacy in Abingdon. So, and this is actually an image of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. If you're on the right, this is the C text, I believe, as well. So, anyways, and this is a Turonian et, by the way. It looks kind of like a 7, though I believe a 7 would probably be higher. It's hard to tell unless I actually put a 7 in there. I think this should be the Turonian et, just means and so on. Then we have Johann the Irishman. So according to Grotemey, again, who is the person who's doing the editing on the version of Íslendingabók I read, this is likely the same person as Adam of Bremen's Johannes Scotus. Of course, Scotai would be one of the Roman names for Irish. It's where the word Scot comes from. Who was Bishop of Magdeburg before he was martyred in either Wendland or Mecklenburg in 1066. And so, again, I don't know anything else about Johann, but interesting that in 1066, not a very good year for some people in Northern Europe. All right, and then we have Bjarnharður, the other one, not the Book of Learned one. Potentially the same figure sent to Norway by Archbishop Adalbert. He stayed in Iceland from 1047, so this would have been after conversion, mind. I haven't really been pointing out these years, but again, Iceland converted in 991, so the very first one was there before conversion. The rest of these are there after conversion. They're essentially still missionaries. As for those unaware, because I didn't mention it, so I'll mention it now. Iceland has their thing. It's essentially their moot, and they had decided they were like, well, we have Christians in this country and we have pagans in this country. We should have one law. What's it going to be? And they decided that they were. And there's a story to it that you should read, but and it's in Íslendingabók. But they decided they were going to be Christian, and so they arbitrarily decided to convert to Christianity as a nation. But they don't have that infrastructure at the time, right? There is no official see in Iceland. You're mostly going to have foreign Christians at the time, and for several years, as you can tell, right, because this is 1047 to 1067, which is 48 years-ish after conversion, and they still are having foreign folk, right? Whether they're Saxons, English, Norwegian, or whatever. All right, so he was sent. So let's see. Probably because of the quarrels between the Hard ruler, and Adalbert. So essentially, Adalbert sent him away during those quarrels because he returned to Norway and became bishop at Selja and later Bergen under Olaf III, the Peaceful. So after Harold dies, this guy comes back from Iceland. So he's there for 20 years, right? This is actually a sculpture unveiled in 1998 of Olaf Kyrre, which is Olaf the Peaceful, who was apparently was near Stamford Bridge when Hard ruler died with Tostig Godwinson, and Tostig's son survived as well with Olaf, and Olaf's best friend was apparently Tostig, Tostig's son, I should say. And so interesting history continuing there after the Norman conquest. That is his son Scully, who actually got the title of Kungsfostra, which is like king's foster, so like the foster adopted by the king, essentially Olaf, who again they would have actually been really close in age, but his great grandson, I believe, was the one who became King Inga the second of Norway. So interesting history that survived again from the Norman conquest. Also, I'm not a big fan of the sculpture at all. I just thought it'd be fun to have another piece of art in here. I really don't like this style at all. Actually, I don't. I mean, it's better than nothing in some ways. You can actually kind of sort of tell it's something on top of something else, but it's not very great. Sorry, I even forgot to put in who the sculptor was here, which is unfortunate. Maybe I can pause that real quick and figure out who it is, just so I can insult them by their name. Yeah, it looks like I found it. It's Knut Steen, who sadly passed away last decade. So maybe I shouldn't insult the dead, but I will insult this piece of artwork. It's not very great. I'm sure it is much better than anything I could do, but I am just not a big fan of this abstraction of things. And if it was a romantic sculpture or anything before that, it probably would have been better. So, anyways, they gotta have a little spicy take in this. Have to have opinions. I'm not just here to give you knowledge. I'm here to have opinions too. Then we also have Heinrecher, likely the Bishop of Lund, said by Adam of Bremen to have died of a drinking binge in 1066. So this guy went out with a good time. Okay, he had that Ebership in Old English. Good time, guys. Okay, and Adam of Bremen is sometimes questioned as a good source, but he does mention a lot of good stuff for this time period. He also even mentions the word Vikings, which is actually not used very much at all. I did a video on this, actually, if you want to watch that, the usage of Vikings and whether or not Vikings should be, say, capitalized or whether or not the term should be really used much at all. So, yeah, you can go watch that as well. So, Peter and Abraham and Stephen from Ermland. So, they're either from Armenia or Ermland. These both could be, Ermland could be either one. Ermland is still, the latter Ermland is still called Erland, of course, today. It's on the Baltic in modern-day Poland. These people would have actually been contemporary with Islever, and they have been proposed as being Armenian Paulicians, a heretical dualist sect that denied the reality of Christ's body and rejected the Church's sacraments, hierarchy, and cult, and especially image worship, or from Ermland, where Orthodox rites had existed from about 1000. I personally think this latter makes more sense. I don't know, it makes more sense to me. You would have had a mix of Orthodox and Catholic stuff going on, especially Scandinavia is really connected with both. I'd say Sweden's maybe more connected to the East than Norway, and Denmark connected more to the West, but you did have Orthodox rites in Scandinavia at this time. So it's actually, so likely mentioned, these are three characters are likely mentioned in the Gragas, which is the Grey Goose laws, and in the Hungervaka, or Hungervaka, depending on, again, your V's, what dialect or time period you're going for with your V's here, whether it's a W sound or but which is the history of the Church in Iceland to 1178, written likely in the 13th century, and they are very much talked about in a disapproving manner. Interestingly, Ari doesn't actually talk about him in really any manner, and that's one thing actually about Ari's annals is he's very distant in some sense. He actually doesn't have a lot of nuance to a lot of his stuff, but it's still interesting and very informative, I would say. So that was chapter 8. Now let's get to chapter 9, because this is taking longer than I thought it would. I apologize. I just like talking about this stuff. So Islever is the son of Gazur the White. He was consecrated bishop in the days of King Haraldr of Norway, son of Sigurdur, which is Harald Hardrada. From 1006 to 1080 is when he lived. He became bishop in 1056. So his estate would become the official see of the diocese of Skalaholt, but he too was a missionary bishop. He was not, a missionary bishop. He did not have a seat, he didn't have a throne, he didn't have a stole, whatever you want to call it. So he didn't have a seat, essentially, right? There was nothing officially organized as far as from Rome in Iceland still at the time. He would have still been ordained by someone, right? But there is no see officially. But where he lives, his homestead, becomes the see. And of course, we had a previous bishop already buried here. So this is actually down here on the right, the latest cathedral looking very Icelandic. Built from 1956 to 1963, it's part of the Church of Iceland, under the Church of Iceland's direction these days. It is built on top of the previous 9 churches they've had there since about the year 1000 or whatever. So 1,000 years they've had 9 churches, and this one is built on top of all of them, I guess. So it does look pretty nice. I think it'd be nice to go and visit. So then chapter 9 is over, pretty much. Now we have chapter 10. Because again, remember, actually, what I opened with is in that chapter 8, I took from that one quote, I did all that research for that, all those first slides. So now chapter 10, we're getting near the end here. We have Gizur to Gisrodr. I wanted to mention that. So Gizur Isleifsson, so the son of Isleif, who we just talked about, chapter 9, he was consecrated 2 years after his father's passing. One of those years he spent in Gautland, apparently. The sources tell us, actually that's what Ari tells us. And then his name was altered so that he was Gisrodr. He told us so. This is unclear even what Gizur means. It is a decently popular name, but etymologically we're just not sure what it means really. But it likely related to Giska, to guess. Well, Gisrodr seems to be from the name Gisl, and would correspond to German Gisfred or Gisfred. And it may have been that the Germans actually made this alteration as he spent some time over in Germany, because we know he went south down to Rome, actually. So he became, Pope Gregory VII became Pope during the investiture no, that is right. I forgot. I need to correct this. He became bishop, not Pope. He became bishop during the investiture controversy, which is known, for example, through Anselm of Canterbury for England. But in Iceland, this is our guy, Gizur. Which is actually had an open conflict between Henry IV, Holy Roman Emperor, and Pope Gregory VII. Right? Essentially, this is the conflict between who gets to ordain these bishops, essentially. Is it the king or emperor, or is it the Pope who should have this authority? And there's butting heads. The Holy Roman Emperor is literally going to besiege Rome, and that is when Gizur arrives in Rome to get ordained, because presumably, because of Gizur's support of Rome in this time, and the authority of Rome and of the Holy Father and the Holy See, that the people who would and could have actually ordained him in the Holy Roman Empire in Germany, present-day Germany, would not have it. So he goes to Rome actually to get this ordination. And so, like his father, Gizur had received his education in Hereford in Saxony. He had also traveled to Rome with his wife and spent a year in Denmark, so Gautland, right, before being consecrated Bishop of Iceland. His connection to the Gregorian cause is evident from the time of his consecration. Due to Archbishop Limar's suspension, Gizur could not be consecrated in Hamburg, Bremen, and went directly to the Pope Gregory VII and had him consecrated by the Archbishop of Magdeburg, Hartwig of Sponheim, a trustworthy spokesman of the papal party in the investiture controversy. This is from an article that just came out in May, actually. David, somewhere. You can, I don't think I actually have it at the end of the slides, but if you look it up. So we have this interesting Gizur when we're finally getting an official see established in Skálholt, the first see in Iceland. You also have someone who's here to support on the side of Rome during this controversy that dominates this period leading up to 1100 AD. And so these are the questions I had to actually present to the class, and so I could leave them to you as well, actually. And maybe I'll just touch on them each just briefly. But so why do you think such a strong literary tradition written in the vernacular took hold in the face of Latin in Iceland? My brief thoughts would mostly just be because of this connection with the conversions, the people who converted them. And that would be a big part of that would be the Anglo-Saxon missionaries, right? And the nice thing in England is that you had a strong vernacular tradition. There's a lot of stuff written in Old English, okay? Poetry, saints' lives, medical texts, right? You have a lot of stuff, even the Bible, okay? It's more of the later medieval stuff after the Norman Conquest, and you have French. Almost all your texts after the Norman Conquest are written in French or Latin in England until after a while. Even in the 12th and 13th century, most texts are still written in French and Latin. So it's later that then is where you get the controversy about, like some say with William Tyndale, right? Which would not have been a problem, actually, because, for example, Alfred was asked to translate some of the Bible into English during his time, before the Normans conquered it. So I think it's that influence that these Anglo-Saxon missionaries who are going everywhere, essentially to France, to Germany, Saxony, right, going into Scandinavia, going into Iceland, and their conversion and having this strong vernacular tradition, essentially. And so, also, why do you think Iceland relatively smoothly adopted Christianity? Again, it was arbitrarily decided in a council in this whole thing, right, to adopt Christianity. And while I would say actually that the Northern Europe, just vaguely in Europe, Christianity has sometimes been adopted by the sword, but oftentimes it's not. The Anglo-Saxons were relatively peacefully converted, right? Iceland was pretty peacefully converted. Of course, there's small incidents, right? That one guy who got insulted by skaldic poetry killed some people, right? But in a lot of cases, well, in Scandinavia, maybe a little bit more violent, something like Olaf and other guys sometimes. But a lot of times it's actually rather peaceful in some sense. And so, why would Iceland though relatively smoothly adopt this? And then also, why did the chieftains or the Gothar in Iceland agree to a union with Norway in about 1262? I think it was off the top of my head. And when Iceland effectively what lost its independence, became part of Norway, and then later on, of course, when Denmark got quite the upper hand in the north, became part of Denmark for several centuries until finally getting their independence again. And so, why did they agree to that? They agreed to that too. Okay, the chieftains voted to become part of Norway, essentially, and so just like they voted to become Christians. So, what is up with that? What's up with the Icelanders? Um, I'll have more to talk about this with my essay, which again will probably be coming out soon, maybe the week after this. But I have another couple videos in mind. We'll see also what else I am able to record with some other people that I should have hopefully getting planned. So anyways, Liam from Liam's Essay, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. If you have any comments, you have any answers to these questions, I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching.